All right, we're going to continue our lesson on text-to-text connections. You just made connections to an author to learn more about the author with different stories that we all love. The next part of our text-to-text connection lesson for today is how do we make these connections? Like, what are we looking for? So when we make a text-to-text connection with either similar stories or the same author, these are the parts of the story that we're actually going to be comparing and contrasting. And they're called the elements of fiction. And all fictional stories have the same basic elements. All fiction stories have characters, whether they're people or animals in the story. You learn about the characters' physical appearance, like what do they look like, and their personality traits based on what they say, what they do, and what they believe. So from that, we get their character traits. Every story has a main character. The main character determines the way the plot will develop and is usually the one who solves the problem in the story. Now, there's other characters in the story, and they are important also. They give other details, explanations, or actions in the story. Okay, so they do have important parts, but they're not the main character in the story. The next part of the elements of fiction is the setting, okay? The setting is where the story takes place, and it helps the reader picture where the characters live and the location of the events that happen in the story. The author will describe the environment or the surrounding in detail so that you can visualize what is happening in the story. There's also some unusual settings such as fantasy, and they can be interesting, but it's hard to imagine what it's like to see a dragon if you've never seen one. So it's a little easier to feel connected to the plot when it's talking about everyday settings, like in the kitchen, at the park, at school, at the grocery store, things like that. Those are common. So, and we can all relate to those a lot easier than we can if we're talking about, fairy tales, or, castles and knights and things like that aren't around us every day. The plot of fiction, refers to the events that take place in the story. Most events in a fictional story follow the story mountain. Okay? The events in the story are the beginning, middle, and end. The descriptions within the beginning, middle, and end, the descriptions and the suspense, are called the exposition. And that is so the reader can make sense of the action and follow along from start to finish. Within the plot is the conflict. The conflict is the problem in the story. The plot is centered on this conflict and the ways that the characters try to solve the problem. When the story becomes the most exciting, it's right before the resolution. It's called the climax. That's the most exciting part. And then the resolution is the way the problem is being resolved. It solves all the parts of the conflict. And the last thing that we look at when we're talking about the elements of fiction is the theme. The theme is the overarching message or the lesson the author is trying to teach the characters and the reader. It is usually the big idea. What is the theme of the story? When we look at the graphic organizer for text-to-text connections, you are going to see that it is very similar, actually, it's the same as the text-to-self connections. The difference is you are making connections between two different stories. So maybe this part of the story reminds you, this part of the story made you think about this part of the story in another book. So in theory, you're putting
at the front door.
You're putting the title of the books up here and you're comparing how they are alike and how they are similar. All right, you are going to practice this skill of making a connection with the story called The Storm Book by Charlotte Zolto. And what I want you to do as you're listening to this story, I would like you to think about other stories you have read or you have heard. What does the text make you think about? And tell me why. And I want you to write down your ideas either on your whiteboard or in your reader's notebook, because you are going to share your thoughts in the next activity.
Hello. Today we're doing a read aloud for The Storm Book
by Charlotte Zolito. And this book won a Caldecott Medal. So it's a really well-written book that is very descriptive and describes what the storm looks and feels like as it's blowing in. So pay attention while I'm reading and visualize in your mind what you think is happening in the story. The Storm Book by Charlotte Zolito. It is a day in the country and everything is hot. The grass looks dry and parched. The buttercups are sticky with dust. The daisy's white petals look gray, and all the flowers, the rambler roses climbing up the gate, the hollyhocks leaning against the house, hang limply on their stems.
The little boy can almost see the heat quivering up like mist from the earth.
A little caterpillar climbs carefully up a dusty blade of grass and then climbs down again. There is a special, hot stillness over everything. The white fox terrier has crawled under the latticework of the porch and lies sleeping in the shade. Even the birds seem too hot to sing, for there is not a sound among the leaves.
The little boy, and you can almost see the caterpillar there. Very hot day.
But the hazy sky begins to shift, and
the yellow heat turns gray.
Everything is the same color. One enormous, listless gray world where not a breath stirs and the birds don't sing. There isn't the slightest motion of a branch, the slightest whisper of a breeze. And still there is something expectant in the growing darkness. Something is astir, something soundless and still for which the little boy waits. He waits and he sees dark clouds beginning to form, throwing their shadow over the parched fields, moving one after another until they cover the sky and the world is black as night. A little cool wind suddenly races through the trees, sways the rambler roses, bends the daisies and buttercups, and Queen Anne's lakes and the long grass until they make a great silver side stretch down the hill. Then it happens. Shooting through the sky like a streak of starlight comes a flash so beautiful, so fast, that the little boy barely has time to see the flowers straining into the storm wind. "Oh, Mother," he calls, "what was that?"
What do you think it was?
Lightning.
Lightning, his mother answers.
That her own lamplight comes from. The little boy thinks of the lamp in his room, with its warm golden glow. and he thinks of the lightning flashing through the sky. The lightning was like a wild white wolf running free in the woods, and the lamp like the gentle white terrier who came when the little boy called. And now, from somewhere beyond the hills, comes the great rolling of the thunder. What's that? The little boy shouts. Rain clouds breaking against each other, and that is the sound they make, his mother says. Now there is a silence again in the dark world, stillness, and then the whole sky lights up in one blinding starry flash of lightning. The sky darkens again as the thunder draws closer, rolling loudly nearer until, with a sudden explosion, it crashes overhead and a silver torrent of rain slants down. The daisies bend almost to the ground until the tearing weight of the wind and the rain sweeping over the rambler roses and trees
as they toss in the cool, huge arms of the storm. Miles away in the storm-darkened city, a young man closes his book and gets up to look out of the window.
Below him on the street, the lighted store windows shine on the wet sidewalks, and every flash of lightning shows people running by, newspapers over their heads or umbrellas held down in front of them to buffet the wind and the rain. The tops of the tall buildings look cut off by the storm darkness, and the little city trees strain at their roots in their loop fence circles, and the wind whips the leaves from their branches. The automobile tires make a swish-swishing sound as they pass. At the seashore, an old fisherman stands boot deep in the waves, and the wind and rain splatter against his oilskin with a terrible beating sound. His face is wet with sea spray and rain. When the thunder roars, nothing else can be heard, not the wild splashing of the black waves, nor the drive of the rain against the oilskin. It seems as though there is nothing in the world but the tremendous ear-splitting of the thunder, followed by streak after streak of cloud-rending light. Once, when the lightning flashes, a little brown sandpiper skids across the sand on his way home, so swiftly that he is gone before the light leaves the sky. Can you see the sandpiper?
Yeah. In the mountains, the rain comes down like a waterfall. Each crash of thunder sounds as though the rocks of the mountains
were splitting apart, but each flash of lightning shows them solid and quiet against the sky. A young husband herds his sheep to shelter. His wife looks out of the window at the storm-torn hills, while their baby sleeps quietly in her arms. The rain drives against the windows of the little boy's house. It beats a loud,
tattooing pit-patting on the roof.
And the wind rising and falling in the trees sounds like the sea breaking against the shore. Slowly the storm subsides. The sky begins to brighten. The thunder rolls away, and only from far, far off now can the little boy hear the as the wind blows the great clouds away from the cool, wet land. The loud
pit-pat-pitting on the roof grows softer and softer,
and slowly becomes a dull pit-a-pat, pit-pit-pit, and at last stops altogether. The air is clean and fresh, and smells of wet earth and growing things. The rambler roses have covered the ground with a shower of wind-driven, sweet-smelling petals. The daisies are still bent from the weight of the rain, and their moist white petals cling together. But already the buttercups are standing straight, fresh and glistening, with one clear raindrop cupped in each shiny yellow blossom. A queer yellow light spreads over the earth now, so faint, so fine, so beautiful that the little boy lets out his breath with a soft whistling sound. And suddenly all the birds break into song. The glistening wet trees are loud with sharp, quick twitterings and long, full-noted calls. Here and there in the sparkling grass, A quick brown sparrow pecks around looking for worms. The light covers everything now. The house, the hollyhocks, the great stretch of grass, the trees, and the fresh, cool face of the little boy who stands in the doorway watching. "What's that?" he suddenly calls to his mother. She comes to the door and looks through the yellow light to a great curving, misty arch of color that, coming from farther than they can see, bends across the sky, over the city, over the yellow storm-whipped sand, over the clean-smelling, bird-singing mountains, over the hill toward the little boy's door. What did he see?
That's the rainbow, little son, says his mother, to show the storm has passed. And she slipped her arm around him so gently he didn't notice,
as he watched the beautiful sunlit colors arching over the world. The end. I'll show you the rainbow one last time.
It really is beautiful. Have any of you ever seen a rainbow like this in real life?
It really is beautiful.
A connection.
The end. Thanks.
Okay, what you're going to do is in the next activity, you are going to make connections from this book to another story that this book reminded you of. And it could be any part of the story.